Lynch Lynch mobs threaten this nation's future. Blogs.economictimes.indiatimes.com 26-June-2017 Lynch mobs have come to threaten not just lone lives but the vitality of the nation itself. This cannot continue and the trend must be put down. Political leaders must make it absolutely clear that they themselves and the governments they lead will not tolerate mob frenzy whipped up in whatever name, and that they put the unity of the people, social peace, law and order above all other considerations. Failure to discharge this duty would vitiate the conditions required for society to function and the economy to prosper. Last Saturday, a mob harassed four Muslim youths, all siblings, traveling on a train from Delhi to Mathura after a bit of Eid shopping, yanked off their skull caps, called them beefeaters and anti-nationals and assaulted them with knives, resulting in the death of one and the hospitalization of the rest. Their village in Haryana observed Eid wearing black armbands. A major Muslim organization has cancelled its scheduled Eid gathering to which high-ranking members of the government had been invited. Meanwhile, in West Bengal, three youths were beaten to death on the suspicion they were involved in smuggling cattle to Bangladesh. These events follow in the wake of a series of violent attacks by armed mobs on people suspected of storing beef or transporting cattle for slaughter. Many Indians worship the cow and abhor the thought of eating its meat. Yet many other Indians do not, including a great many Hindus. Imposing one's own dietary preferences on others, on pain of death, violates individual liberties and democratic rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Systematic violation of such rights to target minorities would lead to schism and violence, damaging India's multicultural tradition and robbing it of the fruits of economic reform. Comments visit website. High provisioning, no pain, no gain. High provisioning, no pain, no gain. Blogs.economictimes.indiatimes.com 26-June-2017 The RBI has reportedly asked banks to make steep increases in the provisioning for bad loans that are referred to bankruptcy courts. This might appear tough. The banks will have to find something like an additional Rs 50,000 crore this year and a like amount next year, at a time when they, for the most part, make losses, meaning they will have to find fresh capital. It might also appear to hinder the bad loan restructuring exercise. However, setting aside resources to cover possible losses would serve to reinforce trust in Indian banking's integrity and the security of depositors' savings. Clearly, the banking regulator makes this the overriding concern. We concur. A sensible way out for the banks is to sell their bad loans to asset reconstruction companies, private equity or vulture funds at a discount and get an immediate fix on how much loss they make and how much provisioning would be called for. This is superior to the banks trying to invoke the bankruptcy code themselves and going through the 2 year or so process of getting a revival package approved and implemented or seeing the company through liquidation. CRISIL, based on an assessment of embedded value in the top 50 NPA cases, estimates that a 60% haircut would be needed on these loan assets. This is smaller than the 100% provisioning that banks would be required to make in cases of attempted liquidation. Banks must get additional capital to underwrite the impact of a haircut or of higher provisioning pending asset reconstruction. The government can infuse fresh capital in the banks it owns directly or create a holding company for state-owned banks that can leverage its own capital to raise resources that can be used to capitalize the banks, or the government can allow the banks to raise capital from the markets, allowing its stake to be diluted. The need is to allow all factor markets to function properly so that the valuation of companies up for liquidation would improve and, thereby, reduce the bank's provisioning requirement. Resolving the bad debt problem involves some inescapable pain. Comments visit website. Uttarakhand HC bans government from buying luxury goods till schools get basic amenities. Uttarakhand HC bans government from buying luxury goods till schools get basic amenities. Financialexpress.com 26-June-2017 Uttarakhand HCS ban on luxury buys by got till schools get basic amenities not the right road to discipline state. Image, PTI. This is one case of judicial activism that you wouldn't quite know what to think of. The Uttarakhand High Court has banned the state government from purchasing luxury items such as cars, mobile phones and air conditioners for failing to provide basic amenities in state-run schools. The court had directed the government to equip schools with sanitary facilities for students, one set of uniform every 6 months, midday meals, adequate lighting and seating, well-stocked libraries, even something as basic as blackboards, some 7 months ago, but the government has failed to carry out the court order. What's worse, on being hauled up by the court, the Secretary, Education, told the court that the Education Department had written to the Finance Secretary in March outlining a requirement of over Rs 900 crore and was still expecting a reply. Irked, Justices Rajiv Sharma and Alok Singh said that the government had failed miserably in fulfilling its duties. While the court taking of the cudgels on the behalf of the students in the 12,533 state-run primary schools, 2,809 upper primary schools and 2,203 secondary schools is appreciable, the ban makes little sense. The optics of cars and acts being ordered for government offices may be poor when children have to sit on the floor in classrooms and schools don't have toilets, but banning the purchases does little to remedy the situation. In any case, such consumer durables are hardly likely to be regular buys, and a ban may not pinch the babus any harder than the court censure would have done. You might also want to see this. A 2015 ruling by the Allahabad High Court to tackle similar apathy in neighboring Uttar Pradesh should have stung more. The High Court had directed the state government to ensure all state government officials and people's representatives sent their wards to its schools. It asked the state to draw up provisions to impose steep fines on such officials and legislators whose children remained enrolled in private schools. Read, post, comments, visit website. Food Subsidy Center acted irresponsibly by not cutting NFSA benefits despite high costs, leakages. Food Subsidy Center acted irresponsibly by not cutting NFSA benefits despite high costs, leakages. Financialexpress.com 26-June 2017 got acted irresponsibly by not cutting NFSA benefits. Image, PTI. Since the UPA had already passed the National Food Security Act (NFSA), the NDA had little option but to continue with it despite the 40% JOR levels of leakages and the excessive subsidies, while it costs FCI Rs 21 per kilograms of wheat and over Rs 29 for rice. 5 kilograms of these were to be supplied each month at Rs 2 and Rs 3 per kilograms to two-thirds of the population. The NDA, however, had a window of opportunity since NFSA allowed the prices to be reviewed after 3 years. The government, however, allowed the status quo to continue last year and, according to this newspaper, is likely to do the same again now. This is unfortunate given the high cost and the leakages, given the poor seeding of ration cards with Aadhaar in many states or the lack of pass machines in ration shops in others. Indeed, with consumer inflation as low as it is at a decadal low of 2% and the last reading of food inflation was negative, the government had a great chance of paring subsidies. Since the present ration shop prices are barely around a tenth of FCIS cost, even if the target population was not reduced, the government could easily have hiked prices without too much of a hue and cry. Even if rice prices were raised to Rs 6 and wheat to Rs 4, they would still be just a fifth of costs. Indeed, over a period of time, as was done for diesel by the UPA and for kerosene by the NDA, prices could be raised by 10 to 15 paise every month subject to, say, the subsidy falling to 50% of costs. Given how poverty has been falling, a 2.2% per annum between 2005 and 2012, this was nearly 3 times faster than that achieved during 1993 to 2004. It is also not clearly why two-thirds of the population should be entitled to such largesse. Keep in mind that while rural wages did stagnate for a brief period following two droughts in 2014 and 2015, they are growing again, and a good harvest this time around should help sustain the rise. Independent of what the government does on the subsidized prices, it has to move to direct cash transfers as far as possible, egging on the states to help digitize the operations. This is working well for other products like LPG, and there is no reason food subsidies cannot be disbursed the same way. Apart from reducing leakages, a big advantage of cash payments is that FCIS inefficiencies will be reduced if, for instance, it is possible to buy the same ration shop quality rice at Rs 20 in the free market instead of the present Rs 29 it costs FCI. This is a net saving to the system. Read, post, comments, visit website. Insolvency. Never before have so many of India's most indebted companies faced this threat. Insolvency. Never before have so many of India's most indebted companies faced this threat. Financialexpress.com 26-June 2017 Never before have so many of India's most indebted companies faced the threat of insolvency proceedings. It is somewhat hard to capture or even understand the full import of all that has happened in corporate India over the past 2 weeks, but this is clearly a new chapter playing out. Events have unfolded very quickly after RBI said on June 13 that it had picked a dozen defaulting companies to which bankers should apply the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code (IBC). Having failed to recover their dues and unable to find buyers for any of the businesses, lenders have got together and decided that half of these, including the RIA-owned Essar Steel, should be referred to the National Company Law Tribunal (NCLT). In the meanwhile, they will continue to look for ways to revive the companies. Rarely have we seen decisions being taken so swiftly. The central bank gave banks just a fortnight to take a call. One wishes these measures had been initiated a few years back because it might have been possible to save more money and salvage many more assets. Instead, bankers continued to restructure what were essentially substandard assets, evergreening them and essentially throwing good money after bad. That is partly because many of the companies, especially those from large business houses, used their connections in high places, read the government, to ensure they had their way and didn't lose out. In fact, the last time around when Essa Steel was bankrupt, IDBI and ICICI, financial institutions in those days, took big haircuts. One didn't hear of any of these lenders, though, benefiting from the bumper profits that the Essa group earned from the sale of its stake in Hutch. One cannot blame the companies alone. Banks should have been far more circumspect and not lent rashly as they have. There are instances of bank officials having helped businessmen get a good deal. But it is a fact that the law in India has helped promoters more than it has banks. The Kingfisher episode is a case in point. Lenders have had a hard time trying to recover their loans to the airline. Former RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan had observed how the rich and well-connected in India got away, of how we did not have the administrative capacity to ferret out wrongdoing. India should not be seen as a paper tiger, Rajan had said. Well, the government has shown us it has teeth and it means business. To be sure, promoters will fight back. They will use every trick in the book to stall proceedings, whether in the NCLT or elsewhere, to try and save their businesses. There is also the big worry they may try and influence insolvency professionals assigned to look into their companies. But, having proved it is serious about resolving the NPA problem, which is threatening to stall the economy, the government must now make sure the process of finding the best solution is a smooth one and within the contours of the law. It has already decided not to go soft on promoters, not to let them get away without paying their dues. Bankers will need to take hefty haircuts, but unlike in the past, promoters too will feel the pain. As Rajan had said, we need a change in mindset, where the willful or non-cooperative defaulter is not leonized as a captain of industry, but justly chastised as a freeloader on the hardworking people of this country. Read, post, comments, visit website. Repo rate data show no guarantee that by merely lowering rates, credit growth will pick up. Repo rate data show no guarantee that by merely lowering rates, credit growth will pick up. Move.financialexpress.com 26-June 2017 Bank credit growth and repo rate data show there is no assurance that by merely lowering rates, growth in credit will pick up. Image, PTI, an issue which generates controversy every now and then is whether or not interest rates should be lowered. It is almost axiomatic that just before a credit policy is announced, there is a clarion call for lowering of interest rates. Is this really justified? The decibel levels for lowering have increased ever since the decision to target CPI inflation number at 4% with a 2% band. With inflation below 6%, it is logical to argue heuristically for the same. Inflation targeting makes sense, but ideally the path for action should be defined, like if inflation moves from 5 to 4.5%, the repo rate will be lowered, so on and so forth. While this would make policy more objective, it would be predictable and remove discretionary power of the MPC. To this extent, the MPC can deliberate on the appropriateness of a rate cut. There are some questions here. First, does lending increase if repo rate is lowered, assuming that banks pass on part of this? Second, is interest rate the only, or even the most important, factor that determines borrowing levels? Third, is there a risk involved when rates are lowered and lending increases sharply, leading to the build-up of an adverse portfolio? The accompanying graphic provides movement in both bank credit growth and the repo rate since 2001. The coefficient of correlation between the two variables is low, at -0.03. While the sign is negative, the number is too small to relate the two absolute variables. However, in terms of changes in the rate of growth in credit and changes in repo rate, the sign becomes positive 0.26, meaning thereby that when repo rate is lowered, the change in rate of growth if credit also declines, which is not what is normally expected, but it is not significant. Hence, statistically the relation between the two is weak. Data also shows that the highest growth in credit was recorded in the phase 2005 to Shunya at 29.1% when interest rates increased by 175 bits per second. Similarly, the lowest growth came in the last 3 years of 2014 to 17 when growth in credit was 8.1% with repo rate coming down by 175 bits per second. Quite clearly, the relationship between the two variables is not very clear, and there is no assurance that by merely lowering rates, growth in credit will pick up. This leads to the second factor of the importance of interest rates in fueling bank credit growth. Access to funds is important for two reasons: investment and working capital. For the latter, there is always the possibility of accessing the CP market, which is what was witnessed in the phase of declining interest rates, where per second CPS increased at an average of 56.3%, though it was also higher in the phase of higher interest rates between 2005 to 08 at 39.6%. Hence, in this case, the transmission of interest rate matters for firms which choose between the two modes of finance. However, when it comes to investment, what is relevant is bank credit. Here it has been observed that demand factors play a role. With low capacity utilization levels, there is less demand for credit from industry. Companies do not invest merely because interest rates have come down. Conversely, when demand conditions are robust, they would not be loath to invest even at higher interest rates. You might also want to see this. Further, the current frustration in banking, involving NPAs and stalled projects, has played a role in hindering demand for credit. There are two forces hindering business. Demand is low as there are few viable projects, with several projects being in abeyance. Second, there is less enthusiasm from banks to lend, and where it is to take place, the risk factor is high, to the extent that even though the base rate or MCLR has come down, the cost of borrowing for such projects is still high. Putting these two demand-based factors together, lower rates do improve the profitability of indebted companies by lowering interest costs. However, for such rates to translate into higher investment, the demand-side factors have to pervade. Third is the aspect of credit standards, which tend to be compromised during phases of high growth in credit. It may be recollected that during the phase of high economic growth, when GDP growth totaled 8.5% prior to 2011-12, bank credit growth was at an impressive annual average of 22.2%, with lower interest rates as the government and RBI provided a dual stimulus to the economy. This was the time when heavy investments were made in infrastructure, as banks funded several projects in this space as well in steel and natural resources. The downswing that followed quite sharply has resulted in the build-up of NPAs. There is hence a warning signal here. Lowering rates for the sake of boosting credit growth may be hasty when conditions are below normal. Pushing bank loans through lower rates tends to bring in indiscipline in lending, which can lead to build-up of adverse portfolios. The Chinese case stands out, where lending by state-owned banks was accelerated to create infrastructure, resulting in NPAs. In retrospect, we may have replicated a similar model with similar dimensions. The important thing is that the interest rate should reflect not just the cost of capital but the risk involved. Today, retail loans appear to be the flavor, as it is believed that the possibility of NPAs building up is lower. Such an approach, combined with financial engineering, led to the financial crisis in the US in 2007-8. Hence, bank lending should be based on judicious principles, as the overall credibility of the financial system can be questioned. Therefore, discretion should be called for when linking lower interest rates with higher growth in credit. While prima facie, the link appears alluring, banks need to be cautious on the lending side. This is the takeaway. Read, post, comments, visit website. Railways growth, how Rail Wheel Factory has kept the machinery rolling, save nation billions of dollars. Railways growth, how Rail Wheel Factory has kept the machinery rolling, save nation billions of dollars. Financialexpress.com 26-June 2017. With over 12,000 locomotives of both electric and diesel types, 50,000 coaches and 2 lakh wagons, plenty of wheel sets are needed to keep them rolling on Indian Railways' 65,000 km network of steel rails. Image, PTI. With over 12,000 locomotives of both electric and diesel types, 50,000 coaches and 2 lakh wagons, plenty of wheel sets are needed to keep them rolling on Indian Railways' 65,000 km network of steel rails. Tata Steel, earlier called TISCO, and Durgapur Steel Plant can meet less than half of Indian Railways' needs for new rolling stock and replacements for worn-out wheel sets. As early as in 1960s, it was realized that indigenous manufacturing capacity had to be built to save precious foreign exchange. At that time, Infosys, TCS, Wipro and a host of other cyber warriors, which today earn the nation millions of dollars, were not even a blip on the horizon. After much deliberation, the Planning Commission sanctioned Rs 146 crore in 1978, setting the ball rolling to build the first ever wheel and axle plant in Bangalore, now Bengaluru, which was inaugurated by Indira Gandhi in 1984. A bold decision to go in for cast steel wheels as against the prevalent standard for forged ones was taken to benefit from the very high productivity it offered. In a far-sighted move, a state-of-the-art technology from the best in the field, Griffin Wheel Company of the US, was selected. This technology for cast steel wheels conformed to the Association of American Railroads specification M208, while the axles were to be made to our specification M101. The Rail Wheel Factory (RWF) in Bangalore forged its millionth axle by March 2008 and tapped its 75,000th heat by May 2009. It reached a peak annual output of 2 lakh cast wheels, 1 lakh machined axles, 70,000 wheel sets, 75,250 forged axles, while 1,000,000 heat was tapped from its 3 giant arc furnaces exactly 5 years later in March 2013. By 2010, it had set up in-house capability to generate oxygen for process requirements and managed to save the nation billions of dollars in foreign exchange over 3 decades. A long forging line of 2 Austrian-built GFM machines and associated furnaces to heat the billets and then normalize them post-forging, 3-axle machining lines with scores of CNC, computerized numeric control, profile copying machining lathes, a giant 300-ton hydraulic press to force-fit cast wheels onto forged axles, and 3 giant arc furnaces which guzzle up to 12 megawatts of electric energy each make up the major hardware at the facility, spread over 2,000 acres. An 8 megawatts diesel generator provides standby power for essential services. Mercifully, the current scenario in Karnataka is not too bad, with power outages being limited to 1 or 2 hours at the most, which the most critical piece of operation, the electric arc furnace, can sustain. A state-of-the-art laboratory equipped with spectrographs capable of analyzing hot metal test pieces in a few minutes to carry out in-operation corrections to its chemistry has made RWF a technology powerhouse in the field of railways for forged special steel axles and cast steel wheels. You might also want to see this. So far, RWF has developed manufacturing regimes of cast steel wheels for no less than 3 sizes, 4 broad gauge BG, 1 4 meter gauge MG locomotives, 8 sizes for BG and 1 for MG freight stock. Over the past decade, it has upgraded to cater to passenger, including LHB, EMU and Metro, stock with 7 sizes for BG and 1 each for MG and N-type. In its portfolio of axles, it boasts of 13 sizes for BG locomotives, both electric and diesel, and 1 for MG locos, 3 for freight stock and 7 for BG passenger coaches. Considering a new long forging line of a GFM machine and a single axle machining line of CNC lathes would now cost over Rs 300 crore each, an investment of Rs 140 crore for the entire plant made more than 3 decades ago to make in India wheels and axles for Indian Railways was a wise decision indeed. Akin to carrying coal to Newcastle, in December 1995, RWF exported a consignment of Type CH36 wheels and F-class axles to the US. Now armed with certification under ISO 9001-2000 for Quality Management System and ISO 14001-2000 for Environment Management System, major initiatives are underway to enter the export field, in line with the announcement made by Railway Minister Suresh Prabhu in his last budget speech of February 2016. Read, post, comments, visit website. Agriculture, horticulture to emerge as new sunrise sectors, Danfoss India President R. Purushothaman explains why. Agriculture, horticulture to emerge as new sunrise sectors, Danfoss India President R. Purushothaman explains why. Financialexpress.com 26-June-2017 An average of 30% or 2.7 million tons of Tamil Nadu's bananas currently go waste largely because of lack of sufficient integrated cold chain infrastructure. Website I am meeting Ravichandran Purushothaman, the president of Danfoss Industries India, for an early dinner at the Ravatana at ITC Grand Chola, Chennai. It has opened recently, only for dinner, and we both have been meaning to check it out. It serves South Indian food which does not look South Indian. The chef and his team have worked on an innovative, one-of-its-kind menu for over 2 years. Food is served from exotic-looking locally sourced crockery and cutlery. We are both vegetarians and there are set menus. We start with tomato rasam. It is poured in wine glasses, hot from a plunger filled with coriander and tomatoes. The liquid is steeped in the plunger for 30 seconds, we are told. It tastes very good, retaining its many flavors. It passes the test of our South Indian palate. Danfoss India, a company focused on climate and energy-efficient engineering solutions, is a 100% subsidiary of the Danish Danfoss Group, a privately held and family-owned multinational which was set up in 1933. It has a turnover of 40 billion Danish kroner, over $6 crore, and employs 25,000 people. The group spends 4.2% of its sales turnover on. The Danish ambassador to India at that time, Michael Sternberg, brought several Danish companies to Chennai and Danfoss is one of them. It was established in 1998. India is among the top 10 countries to lose a large part of its agricultural produce, 126 kilograms of lost food for each Indian. We want to bring this down using our technology. Our company is working towards achieving more with less and making India an energy-efficient nation. We have 4 growth themes: infrastructure, food, climate and energy, Ravichandran tells me, as we finish the rasam. It is followed with chickpea and millet salad with rice krispies. In normal Chennai parlance, it would have been called sundal. Ravichandran has been with Danfoss since 2002 and took over as president in 2013. When I joined, we operated from a five-star hotel in the city. We have come a long way since then. We have expanded the footprint of our sales. We are at 83 locations. Our products are used in commercial horticulture and refrigeration industries. We have built a huge campus in Chennai with world-class labs. We went into local production in 2007. No ready skills were available for building Danfoss's products. We started working with 4 leading universities, building centers of excellence for refrigeration and air conditioning. We do a lot of innovation. The company has crossed a turnover of Rs 1000 crore and employs almost 1000 people. We make sure there is diversity at the entry level. The average age of our employees is 37 and 16% of them are women. As Ravichandran starts explaining to me about the applications which reduce energy consumption, our next dish arrives. It is bitter gourd cruiser, cumin potatoes and shallot jam. The food is turning out to be highly distracting and interesting. We supply 70% of components for chilling plants, but we don't build chillers. A lot of components of the air conditioning systems in most large hotels, like this one, use our components. Our innovations help reduce energy in power modules and solar inverters. The country's smart city initiative will require modern and energy efficient technologies. Cooling and refrigeration will have the highest growth in India. Everyone wants to cut down on power consumption. Danfoss has worked with a number of smart city projects globally. We have the capability and the products and services range that would help change cities into smart cities in the next 10 to 15 years, he says. Danfoss, he says, has a story to tell in each industry. Half of India's milk is cooled using products made by Danfoss. We supply bulk milk cooling systems which preserve milk from farm to supermarket. Wherever there is value addition in agriculture, we are there. We, however, have a long way to go. The penetration of refrigeration in China is 45%. In India, it is a mere 4%. We are working out ways of bringing meat and horticultural products to market without wastage. As we taste pumpkin dumplings followed by banana flour fritters with various delicate chutneys, Ravichandran tells me that Arunachal Pradesh grows the best kiwi fruit in the world. With proper storage and transportation, they can find a huge market in India. Horticulture in India faces 3 major challenges. First, good agricultural practices are still missing. There is no widespread usage of drip irrigation. In spite of subsidies, only 20% of Tamil Nadu farmers use drip irrigation, he says. The second challenge, he adds, is the lack of infrastructure for grading, sorting and packing of agricultural products. Tamil Nadu is the largest producer of bananas in the country, cultivating around 9 million tons annually, but inefficient post-harvest practices have led to massive losses every year. An average of 30% or 2.7 million tons of Tamil Nadu's bananas currently go to waste largely because of lack of sufficient integrated cold chain infrastructure. In the last 4 years, Danfoss has been working in the Theni district of the state, improving farming practices to such an extent that it is now considered a world leader in banana production. The fruits are spotless. You might also want to see this. Bananas earlier selling for Rs 11 per kilograms are now going at the rate of Rs 32. We introduced drip irrigation. The carbide ripening method, which is very bad for the fruit, was replaced with ethylene drying. We want to replicate the Theni model and roll out equivalent cold chain infrastructure across the state and then, in the best case scenario, across all of India, he adds. Danfoss is now looking at apple, orange and pomegranate for intervention. We are also connecting small farmers to a farmers producer company. Many small mango growers are coming together for this. By this time, we have tasted tiny idlis and idiyappam served with different vegetables, both traditional and non-traditional. We are winding down with sago yogurt, which is curd rice with sago substituting for rice with tamarind and dried berry sauce served from cups and test tubes. The dessert is fennel panna cotta. Then there is a white substance sitting on a betel leaf, which is actually a pan frozen with liquid nitrogen. I try it and find it quite refreshing. As we walk out after this rather strange but an exciting meal, Ravichandran tells me that agriculture and horticulture will emerge as the sunrise sectors. There is a big transformation happening in this area. India can become the food factory of the world in the next 20 to 25 years. Sushila, Ravindranath at expressindia.com. Read, post comments, visit website.